There is a statistic that financial advisors cite with a regularity that suggests they find it both important and deeply frustrating. Divorce is the single most common cause of catastrophic financial loss among people who are not already in financial difficulty. Not job loss, not medical emergency, not bad investment decisions. Divorce. In the United States, studies of wealth trajectories consistently find that divorce reduces household wealth by an average of 77%. In the United Kingdom, the average divorced person loses more than half of their net assets. In Germany, research by sociologists Wolfgang Lauterbach and Matthias Schultz found that divorce produces a decline in wealth that takes an average of 12 years to recover from. And for a significant proportion of those who divorce, the recovery never fully comes. These numbers are stark enough on their own. What makes them genuinely striking is the context in which they occur. Divorce is not a rare or unpredictable event. Approximately 40 to 50% of first marriages in most Western countries end in divorce. The average person getting married today has roughly a 1 in 2 chance of experiencing the financial event that the research identifies as the most reliably wealth-destructive thing that can happen to a financially stable person. And yet the preparation for this possibility, legal, financial, and psychological, is, in most couples, essentially zero. People plan extensively for retirement. They plan for buying homes. They plan for children's education. They do not, in most cases, plan for the scenario that has a 50% probability of occurring and a 77% average wealth impact. The omission is not accidental. It is a product of a specific psychological mechanism. And understanding that mechanism is the first step toward doing something about it. The psychological reason that people do not prepare for divorce is not simply optimism or naivety, though both play a role. It is something more specific and more interesting. Psychologists call it the merger phenomenon, the process by which romantic partners, particularly those who marry or cohabit long-term, gradually lose the cognitive distinction between self and partner. Neuroimaging studies of long-term couples have documented something remarkable. When people who have been together for many years think about their partner, the neural patterns of activation overlap substantially with the patterns produced when they think about themselves. The partner has, at the neurological level, been partially incorporated into the self-concept. They are no longer fully other. They are, in a meaningful neurological sense, part of who you are. This merger is, in many ways, one of the genuine gifts of long-term partnership. It produces empathy, attunement, and the kind of deep knowing of another person that is among the most valued human experiences. But it also produces a specific cognitive distortion in the domain of financial planning. When the partner is incorporated into the self, planning for the dissolution of the partnership feels psychologically similar to planning for self-destruction. It feels disloyal, a betrayal of the merger itself. It activates the same psychological resistance as any other confrontation with the possibility of losing what has become part of yourself. And so it does not get done. The practical financial consequences of this psychological avoidance begin long before divorce occurs. They begin in the financial habits and arrangements of the relationship itself, the ways in which financial decision-making is structured, information is shared or not shared, autonomy is maintained or surrendered, and individual financial identities are preserved or dissolved. Research on the financial dimensions of relationship dynamics consistently finds that the degree to which partners maintain financial literacy and engagement with their own financial situation is one of the strongest predictors of financial resilience in the event of relationship breakdown. People who know what they have, who know where it is, who understand the financial arrangements they are party to, and who have maintained some degree of individual financial activity throughout the relationship are dramatically better positioned in divorce than people who ceded all financial management to a partner. The phenomenon of financial dependency within relationships is gendered in ways that have changed substantially over the past 50 years, but have not changed as much as popular culture suggests. Research consistently finds that women are more likely than men to experience significant loss of financial literacy and financial autonomy over the course of long marriages, and more likely to be economically devastated by divorce. A large-scale study of divorced individuals in the United States found that women's household income declined by an average of 41% in the year following divorce. Men's household income declined by an average of 23%. Both numbers are large. The gender gap is significant. And behind the statistics is the specific dynamic that produces them: the gradual, often unconscious, often well-intentioned erosion of one partner's financial agency within a relationship that was never intended to be exploitative, but became so through accumulated small decisions about who handles what. The financial structure of the dissolution itself, the legal, procedural, and negotiation dimensions of divorce, is a domain in which the psychological state of the participants is, at the moment it matters most, at its worst. Divorce activates the full spectrum of psychological responses that we have discussed throughout this series: elevated cortisol, impaired prefrontal cortical function, shortened time horizons, heightened loss aversion, impaired impulse control. The person negotiating the financial terms of their divorce is doing so in a state of acute psychological stress, often profound grief, frequently with disrupted sleep, and sometimes with the additional cognitive load of managing the impact on children, navigating a changed social network, and maintaining functional performance at work. They are making some of the most financially consequential decisions of their lives in the cognitive state that the research most reliably associates with poor financial decision-making. The adversarial legal structure of divorce compounds this. Contested divorce in most jurisdictions is structured as a zero-sum negotiation. Every gain for one party is a loss for the other, which activates the competitive, threat response neural circuitry and makes collaborative, future-oriented thinking difficult. Research on negotiation under conditions of high emotional arousal consistently finds that people in these states make worse deals than they would make in calmer conditions. They accept worse terms. They make concessions driven by the desire to end the aversive experience rather than by the merits of the concession. And they focus on the short-term relief of reaching an agreement at the cost of long-term outcomes that a more careful analysis would have protected. The specific financial decisions that get made badly in divorce are predictable enough to be cataloged. The marital home, the largest asset in most couples' portfolios, is the site of some of the most reliably irrational decisions in the divorce process. Research consistently finds that divorcing couples, particularly the partner who has children and is most emotionally attached to the home as a symbol of family continuity, routinely retain the marital home at a financial cost that is not justified by a rational analysis of their post-divorce financial situation. The emotional attachment to the home, its role as a symbol of the family that existed, as a source of stability for children, as a bulwark against the full reality of the dissolution, drives decisions that leave people asset-rich and cash-poor in a situation where liquidity and flexibility are exactly what they need. The home wins the negotiation. The financial future loses. Pension and retirement asset division is another domain of systematic irrationality. Pension assets are among the most valuable assets in many couples' portfolios, particularly in cases where one partner has been primarily employed and the other has worked part-time or taken career breaks for caregiving. The division of these assets requires specific legal instruments, in many jurisdictions, pension sharing orders or equivalent arrangements, that are frequently not pursued, not because the assets are not significant, but because the complexity and emotional cost of pursuing them discourages people who are already overwhelmed. The partner who fails to pursue a share of a significant pension in divorce, choosing instead to accept other assets in a global settlement, frequently makes a decision that will define their financial position for the remainder of their life. In the exhaustion and emotional depletion of the divorce process, these long-term implications are difficult to hold in mind with the clarity they deserve. Joint debt is a category that produces some of the most lasting and most hidden financial damage in divorce. Couples who have taken on joint credit, joint mortgages, or joint financial obligations are both legally liable for those obligations regardless of any private agreement between them about who is responsible for paying them. Divorce agreements that assign specific debts to specific parties are enforceable between the divorcing parties, but are not enforceable against the creditors. If the spouse assigned to pay a debt does not pay it, the creditor can pursue both parties. Research on credit scores in the years following divorce consistently finds that a significant proportion of divorced individuals experience credit score damage from defaulted joint obligations that they believed, based on their divorce agreement, had been assigned to their former spouse. The financial damage from a former partner's default on a joint obligation can take years to repair and can affect housing, borrowing, and even employment in jurisdictions where credit checks are routine. The children dimension of the financial impact of divorce is a category of its own and deserves acknowledgement even in a discussion focused on the adult financial consequences. Research on the intergenerational economic effects of parental divorce is extensive and consistent. Children whose parents divorce show significantly lower lifetime earnings, lower rates of homeownership, and higher rates of financial instability than children from intact households, controlling for pre-divorce income and wealth. The mechanism is partly direct: reduced household income, disrupted housing stability, reduced investment in education, and partly the psychological and behavioral, transmitting the financial stress and instability of the post-divorce household into the developing financial psychology of the children. The financial damage of divorce, in this sense, is not limited to the generation that divorces. It ripples forward. What, practically, can be done with all of this? The answer has two parts, corresponding to the two phases of the problem: before divorce becomes a realistic possibility, and after it does. The before phase work is unglamorous and, for most couples, deeply uncomfortable. It involves maintaining financial literacy and engagement regardless of how responsibilities are divided within the relationship. Both partners should know what the household owns, what it owes, how it is structured, and where the documents are. Both partners should have some individual financial activity, individual accounts, individual credit history, individual engagement with savings or investment decisions. The goal is not suspicion. It is resilience. The relationship may last a lifetime. The financial skills need to last regardless. The after-phase work, the financial navigation of the divorce process itself, is best done with professional support that is specifically calibrated to the psychological state of the participants. The adversarial model of contested divorce is the most financially destructive and the model most likely to be shaped by the impaired decision-making of acute emotional stress. Mediation, collaborative divorce, and early engagement of financial specialists who can model long-term outcomes rather than just adjudicate current asset values all produce better financial outcomes on average than adversarial litigation. They are also, typically, significantly less expensive. The financial case for less adversarial divorce processes is, in the research, overwhelming. The psychological resistance to them, the anger, the need for justice, the desire for the legal system to validate what was done wrong, is real and understandable. But it is expensive. And knowing that it is expensive is not, by itself, sufficient to overcome it. Having people in the process, therapists, mediators, financial advisors with experience of divorce, who can name the psychological dynamic and help participants make decisions from a more deliberate place, is what actually helps. The financial consequences of divorce are large enough and predictable enough and common enough that treating them as a planning consideration rather than a catastrophic, unpredictable event is not pessimistic. It is rational. The 1 in 2 probability is not a reason not to get married. It is a reason to get married with your eyes open, to structure your financial life in ways that preserve both partners' agency and resilience, and to understand that the most loving thing you can do for your future self and for your children is to ensure that if the relationship ends, the financial damage is as manageable as possible. That preparation is not a betrayal of the relationship. It is a form of respect for the reality that relationships, like all human things, are not guaranteed to last forever, and that the people in them deserve to be financially intact regardless of what happens.